Welcome to the Quo, a community of challengers, disruptors, and changemakers. I'm your host, Payal Patel. Join me as I dive into stories at the intersection of gender, race, and social and economic issues. This podcast series spotlights individuals from various industries, disciplines, and walks of life who are challenging the status quo. Through interesting and thought-provoking conversations, the Quo aims to elevate the voices and stories of endeavoring change agents in hopes of empowering communities and inspiring meaningful change within our society through education, advocacy, and the power of storytelling. Are you ready? Let's get it. Hey there, Quohort. Welcome to season 2 of the Quo. It feels so good to be back with you, sharing stories, discussing important topics, and connecting you to some of the world's most fascinating people who are challenging the status quo. I'm excited to kick off this second season during Women's History Month and on the eve of International Women's Day. It was actually this time last year, in 2021, that I had announced my plans for the Quo, which then came to life on Women's Equality Day in August. So here we are in kind of a full circle moment, and I just want to take a moment to share my gratitude for everyone who's been a part of this journey so far and is back with us to dive into more stories from our community of challengers, disruptors, and changemakers. The guest for this episode is going to be sharing her unique perspective on an issue that is impacting all of us in a really big way right now. But before I introduce her, let me just share a little background on what we're getting into here. Human-induced climate change. It's causing dangerous and widespread disruption in nature and is affecting the lives of billions of people around the world. People and ecosystems least able to cope are being hit the hardest. Increased heat waves, droughts, and floods are already exceeding plants and animals' tolerance levels and thresholds, driving mass mortalities in species such as trees and corals. These weather extremes are occurring simultaneously, causing cascading impacts that are increasingly difficult to manage. They've exposed millions of people to acute food and water insecurity across the globe. So, to avoid mounting loss of life, even more so, urgent, ambitious, and accelerated action is required now. And that is why the UN and its gender equality arm, UN Women, is putting this issue at the forefront and at the very heart of its 2022 International Women's Day campaign. And I personally am excited to co-chair a UN Women event here in Chicago, where I'm based this week, and is bringing together climate change activists for a critical discussion virtually. And that discussion is going to be led by my friend Emmy Victor. Emmy is an award-winning journalist who works for the AccuWeather Channel as a national weather reporter. In her role, she travels around the country covering severe weather and climate change. She's also a member of the National Association of Black Journalists. And like I said earlier, she's joining us at UN Women Chicago to moderate what I know will be a very informative panel discussion on climate change and sustainability. So with that, it is my pleasure to welcome Emmy to the Quo. Hey there.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am great. Thank you for having me on this wonderful day.
Oh, thank you for being here. It's really going to be so great to get such a unique perspective on this because you're really on the ground seeing a lot of this on a day-to-day basis. You see what's happening, and I think that the perspective you're going to bring to this particular issue is just going to be so critical. And so before we get into the nuances of climate change, I do want to begin by making sure everyone knows your personal story. I know that you and I met through your work at AccuWeather. You were doing a weather story. I was working at Navy Pier, and we got together and did a story during the summer. And it was so wonderful to connect with you then. And then since then, I know you and I have stayed in touch, and it's been amazing to see your work and unfold. And I know you travel a lot. We talk about that. You're all over the country, covering so many of these different stories. So I want to start off by asking you, how did you get into weather reporting? What was that journey like? I know you served as a journalist for a little while now, covering various beats in the past. So What led you to making weather and climate change your area of focus?
Yeah, thank you so much, Pyle, for having me again. I'm so thrilled to be able to talk with you all a bit about severe weather and climate change and what the future holds and some of the work we all can do to sustain our planet. As far as my journalism background goes, I've been reporting for about 8 or so years now. Started off in local news and then made a more transition to weather reporting pretty recently. And ultimately, that kind of came down to me thinking about some of the stories that have impacted people the most. I, for many years, covered all kinds of crimes, education, politics. But whenever I'd go out into the community and start asking people, about the stories I cover, the first thing I'd always hear is, you were the girl covering the flood. You were the girl stuck in the snowstorm. You were the girl, out there in the heat that one day. So eventually it really started picking up to me that, some of the most impactful stories that I've done have always been about weather. So I really was thrilled when I got a chance to start working at AccuWeather and really have more of a focus on severe weather. And then now more than ever, segueing a lot of those stories into climate change, some of the recent happenings amongst our planet and what can be done to sustain it in the future.
Yeah, I know that you had shared with me and a couple of members of UN Women Chicago offline about how people come up to you and recognize you through weather-based stories specifically. How is that translated into people's interest in the issue of climate change? Like, I would think that it's safe to say that most people are aware of it being an issue, but do they really, really understand what's going on?
No, that's a wonderful question. And I definitely will say that, there's more of a broader understanding than a deeper understanding, right? People are coming up to me because they recognize the weather, they recognize that it's happening. But what they're probably not noticing is that it's happening more frequently. You're seeing me more often standing in the snowstorm. You're seeing me more often standing on the severe weather extreme heat day. So that's really kind of what we're noticing. Our forecasters at AccuWeather is that these events are happening more frequently on a more consistent basis, and they can certainly have negative impacts if not planned for in the future.
Yeah, for sure. It's really scary to see. I mean, when I see some of the coverage and then, these reports come out, and we're going to talk about one of the most recent reports that the UN also shared. It's really, really alarming. And I just sit there sometimes and wonder, does everyone know about this? Does everyone know what a huge and critical moment we're currently in? So, as someone whose day to day work entails covering all the severe weather and climate change stories, and like I said earlier, being really the boots on the ground during some of the most harrowing weather moments of our time, what are you noticing about the way our weather and climate is changing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's going to be based on where you live. Here in Chicago, what we're going to see are likely more snowstorms because we're going to have more, precipitation. That's something you'll really see a lot throughout the Midwest. And that's going to have harmful effects because more precipitation means more snow melt that streams down into more flooding. So there's a lot of things in that area. Areas that already experience heat. We're talking about Miami, Phoenix. I've done several stories on both of those communities. And I think one thing I've heard from city leaders that are working to mitigate, heat risk is that people have a hard time taking it seriously because it's always been hot, right? So in their mind, well, it's always been hot, so what's the big deal, But even 7 to 8 degrees difference can make a huge difference, in the way we live, the way we operate, concrete being hotter, buildings being hotter, a lot of the things, materials that we're currently using to build, for example, are creating these urban heat islands that are making communities hotter. Even last summer, I got an opportunity to go to Kansas City and cover a heat mapping campaign where they went around the city 3 times a day, once in the morning, once in the evening, and one in the afternoon and evening, should I say. And it was so fascinating to see that, one part of the city was 17 degrees warmer than the other part of the city at 6 in the morning. I mean, that's just alarming,
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said about, extreme heat, more precipitation and how that's going to impact us moving forward. I'm so glad to be able to start covering this. And I know a lot of cities are beginning to look at it, but there's still more work to be done. And that obviously requires this kind of more knowledge as a whole of climate change.
Yeah, I feel like I've noticed that as well, just like living here. And that's not really great news for me because I hate the snow. And so when you say that there's gonna be more snow, I'm like, okay, great. It's time for me to move. But then it's like, where do you move to? Because no matter where you go, that what you said before, that climate change is impacting every part in different ways. So someone who has been saying like, I want to move west, I want to go to California. Well, then you got to think about the wildfires, right? And then everything that comes out there, the droughts and all of that. So everything is being impacted in just different ways, and everything is just becoming more and more extreme. And this week, in fact, alone, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this because here in Chicago, we are reaching the 60s, and it's the first week in March, and then we go back down to 30s and it's snowing. So what do you make of that? What does that speak to in terms of climate change?
Yeah, I mean, this right now, I probably would say that that's more of the La Nina pattern that we're in, this winter where we're going to have, we're seeing kind of this more up and down. So that's a little bit more of just kind of the winter pattern we're seeing. But as a whole, I even felt this winter in particular was very, very up and down, even with the La Nina pattern. So I definitely am also kind of curious on, what that means for us,
Yeah, for
moving
sure.
forward, we could see way more days of the 60s in March, right? Because we are expecting right now, I think, if I remember correctly, I ran some numbers last year, and typically there's only a few days that hit the 100-degree mark, in the summer, particularly in July. But I remember reading and talking with a few people saying that maybe one or two of those days could turn to 10 in the near future. So you're absolutely right. A 60-degree day feels very rare right now, but 10 years from now, a 60-degree day in March, we may see 5, 6, 7, or 8 of them.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, people say this is unseasonably warm, but then I think about someday it's not going to be unseasonably warm anymore. It's going to be the norm. And while it sounds great to have 60-degree weather in March, we know that that's not what should happen, right? Like it's not the nature cycle for our climate. So that's really alarming to think about. Knowing what you know about climate change through your firsthand experiences, how has it impacted the way you approach your storytelling? Have you adapted a sense of urgency in the way you report on the news and cover your stories?
Yeah, no, that's also a really great question. I definitely feel like, I've made it a mission to do as many stories on climate change as possible, and then making them relevant to the news of the day. That could be anything from different conferences that are going on around the country. I look at different seasons. For example, Miami is going to be the first city in the country to have a heat season. They're declaring it from May to October. It's going to be this year, so I'm always looking at different months of the year and how it may impact anything it can impact. I've also dig deeply into different sectors of the economy. Agriculture, a really big one. Visited North Dakota, Wisconsin, did a couple stories on climate change there. Lots of different industries being impacted every day. So I definitely try to relate it and tell people, why does it matter soon, but also why is it mattering right now? I think that's also just as important to know.
Yeah, for sure. What story for you was that moment when you were in the trenches in the midst of it and you're going, whoa, okay, this is getting serious? Has there been a moment for you as a reporter when you're there and you're like, okay, this is getting real, guys?
Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been like a crazy moment that I've been out to see yet, which is good. I do know there's a couple stories that have really had me think. I know in Arizona, in Phoenix, they are working to create more bus shelters, and that really had me thinking. I'm like, okay, bus shelters, what do you mean by that? And they're like, oh, well, so many of our bus shelters are out in the elements. It's just a sign. They don't actually have seating or covering. And I'm like, that's so fascinating, because now they're basically, saying that if they don't start having these coverings, people could just fall, sick, they're more likely to get heat related illnesses and injuries as being out there in this extreme heat in Phoenix, And even when I look around sometimes in Chicago, the bus stop right across the street from me doesn't have a covering. Maybe that necessarily doesn't matter now because we're all used to what Chicago weather can bring, but it could be a big difference in 10 years from now. So, those are just some of the things, I've been kind of looking back as well as at the heat wave Chicago experienced in the 90s. And then, just kind of seeing all the lives that were lost in that tragic, summer of heat, and air conditioning being a really big, issue with that, not people not having access to air conditioning, or not being able to afford it. So that's some things that I have reported on that I definitely worry about, are people who are more vulnerable, being included in these conversations, so I've tried to dig deep into those areas, and showcase communities that are making sure that they are included in those conversations.
Yeah, let's talk about that a bit. Who are those people? What are those communities?
Yeah, no, also a really great question. So, um, historically, people of color are more impacted by climate change. There's been several reports out there to talk about that. You can find it all over the internet. Um, People with disabilities also vulnerable. That all stems down to a couple things. I'll start with people with disabilities. So extreme weather events, more tornadoes, more hurricanes, more heat. For example, we'll stick with kind of the May through October weather. These bring more power outages, hands down. That's a big issue for people who use wheelchairs to get around, people who need accessibility. Because if elevators are down, they can't get around, there needs to be someone there. We're talking about hospitals. Hospitals obviously have the most access to generators than most places, but when we're talking about facilities, where people need care, and we're seeing more power outages because of more storms, more businesses are going to have to start planning for these kind of things. So people who are sick, vulnerable, definitely, they have concern that, reports have shown that there's concern for them to, be part of these conversations.
Yeah.
As far as Black and brown communities, there's a number of things. Health is a big one. Sometimes people have, talked very extensively in, recent reports I've read about the Black community, the brown community having, more heart risk and other, illnesses that can also be a big problem, because if heat, is very, a long issue, a big issue, then you'll see more heat related injuries, you'll see more people passing out, you'll see those sort of things, and a lot of illnesses that the Black and brown community tend to face can be susceptible to heat, so that those are just some of the things. There's a plethora, out there, obviously, regardless of your color, people who have less money, people who are, who have a low income, if you
Yeah.
will, also, having bills are just going to be more expensive, right? You're going to want to cool down more, you're going to want to be more warm, so it's just it's tough, it's a tough situation. And I think that's why it's great that so many communities are trying their best now to start planning for the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for shedding light on that, because it's not something that occurred to me. I didn't think about people with disabilities, right? That's the privilege I have as an able-bodied person. It doesn't occur to me that I could be impacted in that way, because it doesn't impact me in that way. Also, socioeconomic background and BIPOC communities, like it absolutely does touch some of these communities a lot more than those who are not part of those communities, just simply because there's lack of access and lack of resources. So what can people do to help close the gap in those areas?
Yeah, there's so much. I want to start with a group of kids that I interviewed last year, who are making a difference in Racine, Wisconsin. Going around cleaning up Lake Michigan, going around taking samples. Because there's so much change happening, as you know, across the Great Lakes. And it's just so great to see people making that small difference in such a large way. What we're seeing are houses disappearing off of beaches. We're seeing coastal, what we once saw as beaches being covered by water, and we're seeing, houses, literally this close to water now. So there's a lot of studies that need to be done. I think that's one way people can help. Just like I said with those kids, small ways that organizations like the Great Lakes Alliance, doing incredible work here in the Great Lakes to try to reduce, the risk of climate change along the lakes. Um, so many different ways, though. I mean, even when you just do a quick search on the internet, you'll see reducing carbon emissions, right? You'll see reducing your own carbon footprint, using less hot water. Perfect example. People who used hot water for a shower for 30 minutes a day, that's a very large amount of your carbon footprint. Just one of many, many examples. Eating healthier foods, staying away from beef and that sort of thing, also reducing your carbon footprint. It's crazy when you look at a chart and you think, okay, fine, I'll eat less, meat or whatever, but you got to think about the meat comes from a farm, it gets processed, then it goes on a truck, then it goes to somewhere else, then it ends up in the grocery store, then it ends up at your house. Think about how much gas was used from this, from the very first, leg of it, from the farm to the trip to the, manufacturer, to the trip to the grocery store, to your trip to the, to get it, to then that trip to your house. I mean, so much carbon out there, so
Yeah.
it I've thought so much about my ways of just trying to reduce my own footprint, and there's a lot of different ways one can do so, but those are just some of the ways.
So this might be a silly question, but does being on a more plant-based diet, then is that more eco-friendly to in terms of reducing that carbon footprint? Like what's the difference between moving meat and stock from farm
Yeah.
to manufacturers or whatever, than moving vegetables from those farms?
A bit of it has to do with packaging,
Okay.
and then processing. Lighter material, heavier material, less plastic being needed. Vegetables go essentially from cart to cart. They're not really wrapped in anything, where you have to use a lot of packaging for meat. So that's an example.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for that. Yeah, I've always wondered, I'm like, so what is like the biggest difference there? How does, reducing your diet when it comes to meat, make a difference? And as someone who doesn't eat red meat, I'm glad that I'm at least somewhat part of the solution, although I probably make up for it with my hot showers, so I need to probably cut that down a little bit. But like,
Yeah, I'm
so
guilty of taking hot
yeah,
showers, and I have tried. I mean, I've since January of this year, I really tried to make an mission to not take as many hot
yeah.
showers. It just, there's a lot of stats on the internet of just how much carbon dioxide is released each time you take a 20-minute hot shower. So I'm trying to reduce.
Wow. Did not know that. Yeah. And it's especially hard to do in our, Midwest winters too, because like the one thing that gets me out of bed in the morning is that like, okay, I can take a warm shower, right? Like I could take a hot shower to counter the cold I'm waking up to. But I think we can still do that and limit it, I guess, down
Yes,
as much
yeah.
as
It's
possible.
all about limiting, right?
Yeah.
It's consumption. It's all about knowing what it does and limiting your consumption. Simple as that.
Yeah.
I don't think any environmental specialist is out there saying you can't do X, Y, and Z. It's just everything comes in doses and limits, and it's
Yeah.
just things to keep in mind as we move forward.
Everything in moderation, as they say.
Yep. I mean, the reality is our world is getting warmer, and it it has been helpful that, I guess one positive of the pandemic is that a lot of people did stay home. So traffic was less, and that certainly did
Yeah.
help, keep a more cleaner environment, if you will. And now with people taking the hybrid approach, working a couple days a week, if you can, of course, I'm one of the people who worked through the whole pandemic.
Yeah.
But for those who were able to work from home mostly, if not fully, that did save a little bit on, save a little bit for the planet.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I'm one of those people. I was fortunate enough to be able to work from home, and so yeah, I noticed that spending so much less on gas because I'm not traveling, by car as much. My mileage went down, all of that, and I was like, wow, can't believe that in the course of this year, if you're ever looking for a silver lining, that's one of them for sure. But it was also so great to see like life return into parts of the world. Like I saw some reports about dolphins returning to parts of bodies of water that they weren't in before because they just couldn't due to all the pollution and all of that. So it's also extraordinary to see how the animals have been reacting to the result of the pandemic.
Oh gosh, it's been such an interesting couple years. I know in Chicago they just lifted the mask mandate. I know in DC and Philly as well. So it's just been so interesting trying to get back to
Well, the
normal.
normal, yeah, yeah, along with everybody else. So, what are you, in your mind, what are some of the greatest challenges to achieving climate change right now?
Yeah, having a lot of voices at the table, having people take it seriously. I think that a lot of people know it is happening, but may not know the different ways that they can, you know, try to make a difference,
Yeah.
or think that the issue is above them, like as if, there's nothing I really can do.
Or it's not my
You know?
problem, right?
Right.
Like,
Either it's not my problem, some people probably just think that there's really nothing they think they can do, or I didn't create this problem, why should I try to fix it?
yep,
You know?
yep,
So there's a lot of different thoughts out there. And you know, we're going to get to a point now where more communities are going to start investing money. Money is needed for some of this work. For example, a couple communities have now hired chief heat officers.
hmm,
Jane Gilbert of Miami-Dade County being the first one, hired last year. And a few other now cities are trying to hire chief heat officers. You're going to see more of these. And their focus is to specifically make sure that people in their community know their heat risk, know their extreme weather hit risk, that sort of thing. But yeah, I
wow,
mean, I am worried that people may not know enough about how it's going to impact them, because they're hearing that 500-year floods are happening more often, but they don't really know how much often. And we don't even really know how much often, right? We're all still kind of in this learning phase. A lot of the information still fresh and raw, and kind of as it goes out, the next new piece of information comes in. So um, I think one of the barriers is going to be getting the word out there, making sure all voices are in, making sure everyone understands that they're part of the conversation, whether you're a man or woman, whether you're from a different ethnic background, or you speak a different language. Everyone's part of the conversation here, and I
yeah.
think that having people that are designated in communities like chief heat officers, for example, are going to make a big difference, trying to make it a priority for programs that can, help people who are most at risk.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm also seeing a lot more chief sustainability officers too. I feel like
Mhm.
that's also an expanding role. A lot of companies have like added those in the recent years, and it's really cool to see that there are companies and brands that are really making it a concerted effort to be a part of the solution, to counter some of the more harmful effects of other companies. And
Yeah.
what's also wonderful to see is a lot of young activists, because you know that they know they're inheriting this earth, right? I mean, some of the people that we were talking about earlier who are like, not my problem, are thinking, I won't be alive, maybe, to even see all of the implications or,
Yeah.
and obviously not the right thinking at all, but the young people are really stepping up in this fight for climate change. And that's really cool to see too.
Yeah. I want to quickly just point out that you mentioned more companies hiring sustainability officers. That's
Yeah.
true. Amazon just recently put a posting up for a chief meteorologist, following what happened at the Amazon warehouse in Illinois. So
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
you're seeing it across the board. More companies need this weather forecasting. More companies need these officers, to take advantage of what's going to be happening, so they can plan for their businesses accordingly. To that point of young people, really being in this effort. Um, I think it was about a month ago, I did a story on a group at the University of North Carolina that have been, studying the Outer Banks, and everyone's been hearing about the Outer Banks and how, houses have been disappearing and that sort of thing. But this was a really cool project. They were studying these ponds that were formed right after Hurricane Dorian from overwash. Really fascinating story, and I think what made the story the most fascinating wasn't necessarily the ponds that were formed by the overwash, which is really cool actually, because they were studying how long they're going to be there. Are they going to disappear? What's going to happen to them? Can they ever use this island again, that sort of thing. But it was just really the passion behind the group of 17. They were so enthusiastic about driving hours, to go to this, remote area in the Outer Banks to do this research, trying to figure out the next steps and what, more hurricanes can look like for North Carolina, so we're finding that more people are certainly more interested, especially younger people, and more jobs are opening in these sectors too. So I think younger people are really going to be, the future leaders in this effort. They've been hearing about it a lot longer. Maybe they've been hearing about it 5 years of their, 20-year lives, and that's going to carry along a lot longer than maybe someone who's hearing it, who's been living for 80 years will only hear it for, a certain amount of time, so
Right.
I'm thrilled that, younger people are taking this on, and educating their family members, educating their elders, their loved ones, educating everyone. I'm always telling my family members everything I learn, and how things are going to impact them. So it's great that, younger people are not only just taking this on, but they're even finding careers in this area, where they can make this kind of difference.
Absolutely. And I've also noticed that a lot of them are women and girls, which is also very interesting. And this is precisely why we're going to get into what that means in terms of climate change and the link to gender equality at the UN Women's Leadership Forum or Women in Leadership Forum. That discussion is going to be centered on the intersection of gender equality and sustainability and climate change, because many people may not realize that there is a strong correlation between the two. And according to data shared by UN Women, achieving gender equality is the key to ensuring a sustainable future for all. So what have you noticed specifically about that link?
Yeah. So I had mentioned the chief heat officer in Miami, a woman, the first three ever chief officers in the world, Miami, Florida, Athens, Greece, and Freetown, Sierra Leone, are all women. I mean, talk about how fascinating that is,
That's
that
so cool.
women are truly leading this next phase of trying to protect people from these, vulnerabilities of climate change. So, we're definitely, I mean, I think a lot of the people I've interviewed for, stories I've done have been women. So it's great, especially because, studies have shown that women are at risk for some of these issues that climate change can bring. So yeah, no, I'm seeing it. I'm absolutely seeing it. I'm a woman reporting on climate change. I don't know. I don't know if I know anyone else who's doing that. So I'm sure they are out there. And I
Yeah.
please message me. I will credit all of you, and I'd love to meet more of you. But there aren't many climate change reporters and climate change beats right now as a whole. And there's definitely not a lot of women doing it for sure. It's a topic that not many are picking up. So it's great. I think it's fascinating. It brings another level to the conversation. And women, just like men, have different stages of their lives. We go from being children to teens to adults. Some of us go from moms to grandmas. In different stages of our lives bring different challenges with climate change.
Yeah.
So it's good that we're having different voices at the table to kind of to link some of those areas together.
For sure. And I think this is probably also why UN Women is making such a strong appeal for gender equality around this specific issue of climate change, because if more women are leading this charge, then if you get more women involved, we're looking at potentially reaching a climate solution more quickly, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, women make up a large population of this world,
Yeah.
and it's not just a woman problem. It's not just a black or brown problem. It's just not just a mom or dad or child or brother or sister problem. I mean, this is a problem for all of us.
Yeah. It's
Um,
an everybody problem for sure.
Everybody problem. And that's why it's great that, women have taken this on, to be the voice, and spread the word, and it takes so many different areas, you need so much data, so many different career sectors can really help, bring information together that can really make a difference.
Yeah. And I know you're going to do a great job at leading the conversation at the Women in Leadership Forum on behalf of UN Women Chicago. And I'm excited to share a little bit about that. But as the moderator, I wanted to ask you, what are you most looking forward to asking the panel of women that we've assembled, because it's a very impressive group of women. I know that you and I met them in advance of this event, and they had a lot to say and a lot of knowledge and inspiration to offer. So, what are you most looking forward to, like getting into it with them, and what kind of questions do you hope to get out of them?
Yeah, talk with them. I got a chance to, speak with them earlier this week, as you mentioned. And, I felt like I wanted to like clip a part of our conversation offline and like, say, here it is, here's some of it for next week. It's going to be great. What I love about our panel is that there's so many different women doing different things in climate change. We have Rohini, for example, who's working for United, and I mean, talk about, an amazing role she has as senior manager to be able to help United plan for a more sustainable future. I mean, the airline industry is huge when it comes to
Yes.
planning for climate. I mean, they are huge, and we need them as part of that conversation. It's nearly impossible to have a conversation about climate change without including the airline industry, period. They get us where they need to go, but unfortunately sometimes some of that causes harm to the environment. It
Yeah.
is what it is. We all understand that, and they're planning for a better future, so it's going to be great to hear from her. It's going to be great to hear from Michelle, who's an engineer, and has a lot of experience in the oil and gas industry, and her way of kind of sectoring into the food industry and her journey in that. It was just such a fascinating hear. And I love that too, because I've done so many stories on agriculture and climate change. That one is huge. I mean, we can't survive if we don't eat. We just can't, and to be able to hear, from her about, some of what she does at her company is going to be really, really great too. We have Wendy, who's going to be really great. Shayna, who's also going to be really great. Both of them also really, powerful women that have done a lot in this climate change sector too. So yeah, I'm just so excited to hear from them about what they do in these individual industries, and how they're trying to make things more sustainable for all of us. And then I also have to say I'm interested in hearing about some of the barriers that they've broken. Particularly being women in these positions that require a lot of data. I remember talking offline and hearing stories about how a lot of the data they've presented has had to be double checked or triple checked or quadruple checked because
Yeah.
they weren't necessarily believed. So it's going to be really fascinating to hear from them, and the barriers that they've overcome to get the word out about climate change. I'm excited. I'm thrilled to be the moderator, and with my background of reporting on this beat, it's going to be great to really hear from some of the people who are doing this heavy work, this heavy lifting.
Yeah. No, for sure. And since we're talking about barriers and inequities, I also wanted to make it a point to ask you, what has that looked like for you in your industry also? You were talking earlier a little bit about you're not sure how many women are out there. I'm sure there are, like you said, but it's still something that we need to see more and more. So, what have you experienced in terms of gender-based inequities in your line of work, and what do you foresee, in terms of the changes that need to happen in order for there to be more equity in your industry?
Yeah, I mean, I'll first start with meteorologists, because I do think having more weather forecasters of color is critical. Um, I know that weather people, whether women, whether men, are so beloved in their communities, right? And I think that's one of the biggest ways we can start reaching people. People already watch the local news; they're already watching their favorite weather folk, morning and evening. So they are key when it comes to getting the word out about climate change, because that's already an area that people are watching, and you're used to it. We all remember the meteorologists we grew up watching. I do. Mine was Sam Champion. That's my guy.
Oh, yes.
I woke
Yeah.
up every morning at ABC 7 in New York City. So if Sam Champion is telling me that climate change is a big deal, I'm gonna listen, because I know Sam doesn't lie to me. He's gotten all my weather forecasts right.
Yep.
So they have such a huge responsibility in this effort. I'm glad that AccuWeather has taken this on, and other companies have too. So one thing I think I would definitely love to see would be companies hiring more meteorologists of color. Um, to my understanding, there are several organizations out there where, well, they'll have thousands of meteorologists, only maybe 300 or 400 in the group are of color. So I went to Jackson State University last month and did several Black History Month pieces on the school, and they've been offering meteorology for about 45 years now. They've graduated about 100 Black meteorologists, but when you do the math, that's only two a year, and not all of them go on maybe to pursue it, or if they do, not all of them necessarily on TV. They're doing the background work, which is also fantastic and great, and we need that. Some of them are going on to work for the National Weather Service, and doing some amazing work there. But I still think, maybe not many people know that that's a route they can take. So I definitely think that, at least in the weather sector, it'd be great to see more meteorologists of color as a whole, just to, start getting the word out on the local level. And,
Yeah, and like you said,
emergency,
get more people involved, with those different perspectives, right? Like,
yeah,
have them become part of the conversation.
yeah. And then even in areas like emergency management, emergency preparedness, um, it's great to have people who know the community in which they've lived and served. And, I definitely think that those kind of departments should have people at the table that look like the community they serve. So I think it'd be great, if emergency management departments can hire more people of color too. Because if you got 3 or 4 people who are, kind of doing the planning, and they're all white in a community that's maybe 30% Black, well, you're not quite reaching out and or hitting the mark in those areas. So I think it's critical. I mean, there's so many areas in the weather sector which people can start being in roles that can make a difference.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with that more. And that's exactly why we're doing the work that we're doing, for me on the UN Women's side, and then what you're doing, obviously, every day as part of your daily work. Before we wrap this up, I do want to make it a point to ask you, is there still time to make changes in order to slow down climate change? Is it still preventable? And if so, when does it become too late?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of reports. All these companies have different goals to reduce, be zero free by 2050 or whatever. So there's so many different goals out there, timelines, and um, I don't know if it's preventable at this point, but I do think it could be slowed down. It's kind of like the COVID situation, where it's like, wearing a mask, staying distant slowed it down, the spread, but unfortunately, even with,
Yeah.
you still can get the COVID. So, you know, um, it's kind of like, that's the best way I can kind of compare it, is that it's still an issue, just like the virus. but we all have a serious part to play to make it better, if we can. So that's kind of.
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it because you're right. I mean, I don't know if I was thinking the same thing. Like, is there something that we can do to fully prevent it? But I think we're past that. But we are reaching a very critical point, it sounds like, based on the report that I just saw, which was by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And the UN just put that out, if not like a week or two ago. And so that is one resource that I know that I would encourage everyone listening to go check out to just learn more and educate yourselves. What other resources can people find to get some self-awareness, make informed decisions, and make adjustments to their lifestyle?
Oh gosh, there's so much out there. I'm trying to think if there's a couple just right off the top of my mind. There's some universities out there doing some incredible work. The University of Buffalo was one great one. They have a whole center devoted to studying extreme weather conditions. So they're a great resource. I've leaned on them for expertise. The University of Wisconsin has a great limnology area in which they've been, focused very heavily on the waters and the impacts of climate change there. A lot of universities, University of Iowa, another really great one. I've leaned on for different stories about how lakes and rivers are changing and what more ice cover means, what less ice cover means, and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of different resources out there, but I love that so many different universities are tackling this on because research is critical. Without fact-based knowledge, without it, people may not believe what's going on. So I think starting with you know factual sources like universities, that are really putting the resources into making sure that people have the knowledge they need are great. Another organization I'd love to shout out is Climate Central. They're really great, and I've interviewed them several times. They have fantastic information out there, compiling information from the National Weather Service and just using historical data to look at what the future holds. Really, really, really great tool. I highly, highly recommend Climate Central too.
Okay, good to know. I'm gonna have to check out some of these myself. I've just become more and more curious and also wanting to play an active role myself in being part of the solution. And I hope that people listening to this episode right now and those who will tune in to the Women's Leadership Forum will also feel the same way. And speaking of which, we do want to encourage, if you're listening to this in time, International Women's Day, March 8th, Tuesday, Women in Leadership Forum presented by UN Women Chicago is being held virtually, and you can tune in from anywhere because it's a virtual format. One of the other silver linings of the pandemic, we didn't want to do this in case it wasn't safe to do so, but what's great about it is that it opens it up to people all over the place. And we encourage people to go check it out. It's the ticket information. If you're watching this on a visual platform like YouTube, it's scrolling at the bottom of the screen. But if you're tuning in through a streaming app and just listening in, you can go to unwomenusa.org/Chicago/events. And we'll have ticket information there, a little more detail on our panelists who are amazing. Emmy shared a little bit about them. They're exceptional women leaders in this specific domain and have a lot of great insights to offer. So we're looking forward to continuing this conversation there. And the proceeds are actually going to benefit the UN Women relief efforts in Ukraine right now, which we know is a really big issue and could use a lot of support. So you're doing a great thing by simply being present and in attendance at this event and providing some much needed support over there in Ukraine. So please check it out. And Emmy's going to lead that conversation, and we're so excited for that. So thank you for agreeing to do not just that, but for joining us today here on this podcast with the Quo community. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you for yours. It was such a pleasure to be able to talk with all of you about climate change, and I look forward to more discussions.
Yes, let's keep this conversation going. I really definitely want to make sure that people understand, what's at stake here and know that they can do something to slow it all down. And let's just hope that we get to that point of mitigation before it's far, far too late. So once again, such an important topic. And Emmy, thank you for all the work you do as the weather reporter, as a climate change reporter, covering all these stories, informing people. Your role is so important in making sure people are aware and know what's going on, and also combating a lot of the misinformation out there. So we're so grateful for your role.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Thank you. And those tuning in, we hope to see you again soon. Always good to be with you, and we're so glad to be back for season 2. Let's keep going. Hey, it's me again. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, and I really hope you did, please subscribe to the show on your favorite streaming service so that you're notified when new episodes are posted. Also, be sure to follow The Quo on social media at The Quo Media across all platforms for the latest and greatest. Thanks again for joining, supporting, and uplifting the Quo community, or as I like to call it, our Quohort. Catch you next time.